Hi, and welcome to Gonzarilla. My name is Brian Bentley. This is a podcast about music, movies, comedy, and all forms of excessive consumption. And today we're going to be talking to Al Kooper. And it's a thrill for me personally to be talking to a guy that I've followed since I was a child throughout the arc of his musical career. Most of you will know Al as the legendary studio sideman for Bob Dylan. He joined the Blues Project as their keyboardist in 1965. He left the band shortly before their gig at the Monterey Pop Festival in 67. Al then formed Blood, Sweat, and Tears in 67. He left due to creative differences in 68 after the release of the group's first album, Child is the Father to the Man. Al next recorded the supergroup session album Super Session with Mike Bloomfield and Stephen Stills in 1968. And he has played on hundreds of records, including the Rolling Stones, B.B. King, The Who, the Jimi Hendrix Experience, Alice Cooper, and Cream. And in 1972, he signed the original lineup for the band Lynyrd Skynyrd and produced their first 3 albums. So, Al, I want to welcome you and ask you if maybe you feel like you're the higher evolved Zelig of rock and roll, considering everywhere you've been.
Well, I only feel it when I celebrate my birthdays.
You're a legendary keyboard player, but you began as a guitar player, and your career started off at an extremely young age. I believe at the age of 14, you had a band called the Royal Teens and a hit single called Short Shorts. So you've been in the public eye for forever. How has that shaped your life? Do you think that's made you different than other people?
Oh, definitely. I think it's a good thing because I had focus so early, and I have only let go of that focus because of my health a few years ago.
You started out as a songwriter, as you know, a lot of great songwriters did, for a publishing company. So you and 2 other writers wrote This Diamond Ring for Gary Lewis and the Playboys. I assume that structure you got from working for the publishing company really helped you a lot in the songwriting end of things.
Well, I wrote with 2 other guys. They wrote the words, and that was helpful. And the 3 of us respected each other, and so that was very helpful. And we did a lot of work together, and we wrote a lot of songs. And we came to work every day and wrote songs instead of, sitting behind a desk or answering the phone.
Yeah, it's easy when you don't have that kind of structure to say, well, I'm going to write a song today. Oh, maybe I'll go to the beach or something. But when you have to come in, sit at a desk, I had the same experience as an advertising copywriter. I went from freelance to in-house, and I found it was a lot easier to write in-house because there weren't as many distractions. Give me 3 great ads by 3 p.m., I'm sure that was something that helped you, and you had a leg up on guys that are just messing around with their guitars, trying to come up with chords.
Well, actually, in the community I was in, there were a lot more people doing what we were doing.
Right.
So, and we all were friends. It was competitive, but only musically.
Did you meet the people that you composed for? Did you hang out with Gary Lewis?
No, rarely did we meet the people. We were too busy.
Did you know Carole King in that group?
Who?
Carole King in that group. Did you know them? Did you ever run into them? The Brill Building group?
Well, they weren't in the Brill Building. The Brill Building is 1619 Broadway. And the building that we were all in was at 1650 Broadway, and that's what it was called. Didn't have a subtitle. And so they were there, but they were on a different floor than we were on. So the only way, we could have bumped into each other is if they came to our floor and we went to their floor, which I don't think we did.
How did you meet Bob Dylan and get, as a 21-year-old, get the gig to play on Highway 61 and Blonde on Blonde, which I believe was the first double LP from a major artist. And of course the organ on Like a Rolling Stone, which Rolling Stone magazine rated the greatest rock song of all time. Can you just talk a little bit about like how you got a break that big and what happened?
Well, this is a common story. I mean, in that I've told this story more times than anything else in my career. So I'll try and cut it down. But I was a big Bob Dylan fan. And to help me out at that, I was very good friends with the gentleman who produced him, Tom Wilson, at that time. And he was a black man, I think he went to Harvard, and was very involved in the jazz world. However, he could deal with other musics. So he inherited Dylan from Hammond, John Hammond,
Mm-hmm.
who signed Dylan. And they sort of threw John Hammond out and gave Dylan to Tom Wilson.
What kind of guy was Tom? Because he doesn't get like the pub or the publicity that some other producers get.
I disagree.
I don't know if the average person knows who he is compared to some of the huge...
Well, does the average person listen to Bob Dylan?
I mean, I know who he is.
Does the average... did people listen to Frank Zappa?
Yeah.
Well, these are people that he worked with in very important times in their career. Simon and Garfunkel. So, he's not just Bob Dylan.
He's known in the industry, but he's not like, people don't talk about him like George Martin or, somebody else like that. And I think it's kind of sad because he was obviously extremely talented and he had to have a solid, even temperament, I would imagine, to deal with Bob at the time. Would you say he was laid back or would you say he was intense?
Well, Bob pretty much ran everything. He was assisting Bob in Bob getting his thing across. Right.
When you guys did the electric versions of those songs and you electrified Blonde on Blonde, and it was definitely a step in a new direction for Dylan.
I don't think we did that. I think he wanted to record his album in Nashville, and he brought me and Robbie Robertson with him, I think for comfort level, because I don't think he knew any of the other musicians. We were all strangers in town.
Bob made that transition to Robbie and the Hawks, and he took him on that European tour, and that's pretty well documented that people were having a hard time handling that new sound. Was that a tour you were offered, or did you just was he already pretty much wanting to go?
Well, there was a tour that was half and half. There was Harvey Brooks and myself, and Robbie and Levon. That was the Forest Hills Stadium, the Hollywood Bowl, and then he let Harvey and I go and brought in the rest of the band.
I assume that you've seen all that footage from the European tour where the audience is just completely freaking out. I assume that was something you were kind of glad you missed.
Well, we were booed at Newport.
Yeah. You only played 3 songs, right? In 65, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't remember. We had a tough time at Forest Hills also.
Yeah, expectations of audiences can get to be, and I think that Dylan was obviously pushing those buttons to make a point that, he wasn't going to be boxed in with any particular sound.
Nor was he going to pay any attention to the booze.
I didn't know this, but you were an A&R man at Columbia?
Yes.
How'd that happen, and who did you work with?
I went in and asked for the job because I knew a lot of people up there through Tom Wilson. I had to, my audience was with Clive Davis, who was the head. And the first thing I had brought in, before I started, I got the job, and then I was starting 2 weeks after that. So for a week of those 2 weeks, I went to England, and I bought clothing and LPs. That was my, I had never been before, and I also got contacted by the Rolling Stones and played with them while I was there that week.
I assume that's when you did.
You can't always get what you want.
Yes, I assume that's the French horn intro. You know,
No, it actually, I put that on later.
Oh, okay.
I was playing piano and organ.
Did you run into Nicky Hopkins, or were you guys like competing for gigs and stuff like that?
I didn't run into him. There would have been accidental if it happened.
This was another thing I was sort of not aware of, but I did some research on this, that you were the stage manager at Monterey Pop.
Assistant stage manager.
Assistant man. Did you work all 3 of those days?
Yes, and a month before.
Was there a certain logic or political thing about how you put together the order of bands? Because I remember Pete Townsend.
We had nothing to do with that.
Okay, that was the John Phillips and Lou Adler. Was there tension? That I've read somewhere there was tension between the San Francisco contingent, like the Dead and the Airplane, and they felt that LA was kind of commercial, and there was sort of a sense of...
That's bullshit. All these musicians had played dates together because of Bill Graham. It was not unusual for them to know each other. And this was just an offshoot of what Bill Graham had done.
You were friends and neighbors, or you ran into Hendrix a lot in New York and jammed with him?
Well, we became friends at Monterey. As a matter of fact, he asked me to play on Like a Rolling Stone at Monterey, but Lou Adler wouldn't let me.
Why is that?
Because I was working.
I know the Doors were not there. I guess they had a #1 album at the time, so that was kind of interesting. They passed that up.
I had nothing to do with the booking.
Did you happen to witness the Byrds meltdown on stage with Crosby quitting the band basically to play with CS? No,
there were things I was more busy with than what was going on stage.
So
I didn't get to see that much.
Yeah. You did a solo set there, though, right?
I did.
And that's available basically on bootleg?
I think there's official Monterey albums and films, and they're on both of those.
The jam sessions that you described in one of the interviews that I came across sounded amazing. You guys would go into places like, I guess, what would become Electric Ladyland, or was Electric Ladyland, and you said that you'd start playing and you'd leave, walk out the door, and the sun would be coming up.
That wasn't Electric Ladyland. That was where Electric Ladyland was later built. It was a club, and then the club closed, and they built a studio there.
So, I mean, who would be would there be a typical group of guys that you would jam with, and what would you do? Just cover songs, or just start riffing in a key and people just start improvising?
Yeah, it was whatever happened. And this was very common in the 3 big clubs, which was the Cafe A Go-Go, the Scene, and whatever Electric Ladyland was called. Those were the big jam clubs. And so you'd go there during whoever was playings last set. And then when everybody left, there were people that stayed. And then they locked the doors, and we did play till the sun came up.
Wow.
But in those three places, not just electrically.
In 1968, you put together the Super Session record, and you brought in Mike Bloomfield. And from what I hear, he was not feeling well, so he only did like one day. And then Steve Stills came in. What was it like working with Stephen Stills? I hear that he was, like a one-man band, could play a million instruments. Was that a good experience for you?
I didn't know about him playing a million instruments. I asked him to come be a guitar player. And I believe that's what he did on Super Session.
Right.
So I didn't know about any of that stuff. I knew him enough that I could call him. And they were putting together Crosby, Stills, and Nash at the time. I don't think anybody knew about it. But that's what was happening, and I knew that. So I called him and asked him if he was interested in coming to the studio for one night. And he said, sure. And he came and he played.
You had a tremendous, I don't know if it's the third, fourth, fifth, or sixth act in your career, but in 1972, thereabouts, I believe you were living in Atlanta at the time, and you went to a local club. The original Lynyrd Skynyrd was playing for like a week's residency or something. And
that's what. I hung out at that club when I lived there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you played that club, you played for a week, and that's the only way you could play that club. And so when I could, I would go there every night and listen, especially the first night, to see if I heard, a band that I liked.
And you were looking, you said, for a great 3-chord band.
I was looking for something to produce.
There was
I could have just as easily have heard a horn band and was interested in that.
The funny thing is I find that Skynyrd has this ability to reach out and sort of jump all kinds of genre boundaries. They have fans that would not normally be into that kind of, I don't want to say Southern rock, but it's definitely roots rock, blues rock. They started out doing an homage almost to Free. A lot of early Free songs.
Well, that's my favorite band of all time.
Yeah, I love them.
So it was no accident that I liked Lynyrd Skynyrd.
When you saw Lynyrd Skynyrd, were you kind of, with that first night, were you kind of saying, holy shit, this is like Free only?
No, I didn't really put the Free thing together. And I got to hear them play 3 sets a night for a week. So I heard everything, and by the third night, I went and sat in with them.
I heard about the can you play this in C sharp, Al? That was a funny story. I'm sure you could, obviously.
Yeah, that wasn't the problem. I laughed when he said that.
Had you heard that single that they put out in '68 called "Need All My Friends"? It was kind of circulating around.
I heard it much later.
Yeah. What made a guy from Brooklyn move to Atlanta? Was it the musical?
I was born in Brooklyn. I lived in Queens, by the way.
But was it the richness of the musical culture down there? Was it the authenticity?
Actually, I worked in the studio there, and I really liked the studio. So that was the first thing. And then I was sniffing around in another place for things to produce.
When you heard Freebird for the first time, or when I think you said that you saw him, you said they're pretty good, and you saw him the next night, you said, you guys are really good, and then it just kept going from there. Did you immediately see the commercial potential in the band?
I wouldn't say that that Freebird was unique for what they were doing. I liked it all.
Ronnie Van Zant could write songs. He had charisma and presence. And so at the time...
Well, I never really heard a band like that. And remember, they didn't have a keyboard player yet.
Yeah. When did you make the decision that you were going to try to sign them to Sounds of the South, the record label?
The third night that I heard them.
Uh-huh.
And I made the offer.
They had been around for 4 or 5 years, and things were getting kind of, I wouldn't say desperate, but they weren't really going where they wanted to go. So in some ways, there's a chance that had you not heard them and seen the potential and signed them, that they would have been good, but you never would have had a record like Pronounced that has been called one of the greatest production jobs, of all time. I wanted to talk a little bit about the recording process of this. When you guys went in the studio to record Pronounced, did they show up with finished work that they would just deliver to you, or was there a lot of pounding away, No, there
was maybe 1 or 2 songs that weren't completely done.
In numerous interviews, you said that they had this ability to play the exact same thing, the exact same way, over and over, and that...
It wasn't an ability, it was what they did.
But it was unusual, right?
Yes, I'd never seen it before.
So when you started to record them, I assume that made it quite easy in the process. If you had to go back and do a retake, you'd say, pick it up from, bar or whatever, and they would just, like a machine almost.
We punched in. We didn't make the whole band play.
Your background as a music songwriter, that professional background, did you, in effect, ghostwrite parts of those albums, or was your job just to capture?
Not really. I just made changes.
Well, there's that story about the recording of Simple Man. Apparently at that session, Ronnie walked you out to your car, more like he escorted you and said, "Hey, Al, we'll get back to you." And
I didn't like it as much as the other songs.
Yeah, what was your...
I just thought, that they might have had other stuff that was better.
It's an incredibly simple song. It's C, G, A minor, 3 chords. And
they're all simple songs in a lot of ways.
Yeah, but you ended up coming back and playing organ on that.
Yeah.
Did it change? Did the song change from when you weren't too thrilled with it till when you played on it, or was it basically the same song?
Not that I wasn't too thrilled with it. It just was not as good as the other stuff.
What was it like working with Ronnie in the studio? He has, his reputation goes all over the place. I mean, Ed King said that he was incredibly supportive and a great band leader, and just the inspiration, the blood, sweat, and tears, you will, it kept that band going. But he also could be very physically intimidating and violent. I mean, did you feel uncomfortable at any time working with him, or feel like...
No, because I didn't play games with them. And they didn't play games with me. It was like if they wanted something, they said so. And if I wanted something, I said so.
So they trusted you implicitly, pretty much.
I don't think so. I wasn't afraid to say anything to them, and they weren't afraid to say anything to me.
Well, that's the way it should be. I mean...
It was a tough situation because after the first album, they weren't finished with the songs when it was time to do the albums. And it was really bad on the third album.
Nothing fancy you're talking about.
Yeah.
That was written pretty much on the road, and they didn't do the Hell House rehearsal.
It was written pretty much in the studio.
Did you ever visit Hell House, their rehearsal space, or ever get a chance to check that place out?
No. I went there once to see them play, the big concert hall in their hometown.
Jacksonville.
The first time that they played, like a really big place at home.
Yeah,
I wanted to see that.
I have a funny story about something. I was at the Santa Monica Civic to see Rossington Collins Band, and they were playing Freebird, and right in the middle of one of the guitar solos, the power went out. Complete power failure. Lights out, people kind of screaming, "Oh my God," and right in the middle of the song. So Rossington Collins comes back about 15 minutes later, lights are on, everything's up, they count off, they go right back to the same friggin' note, same bar in the middle of the guitar solo as if there was never an interruption. They just picked it up and I think that's an example of just how tight these guys were.
Most bands have improvisation every night. This band had no improvisation whatsoever.
Do
you understand what I'm saying? That's what made them unique. If there was a guitar solo, they played it exactly the same. If there was a keyboard solo, they played it exactly the same. And that's how it was. And I had never seen anybody do that before.
Everyone's heard, or a lot of people have heard, the story of how Ed King contributed or brought Sweet Home Alabama to the studio. I assume when you heard that, it was like, how fast can I get these guys in to record them?
Well, no, they came to me and said, we have a new song, and this is before we went in to cut the second album. After the first album, I got them the Who tour, where they opened for the Who. So their first tour they ever did was opening for the Who. And I went along on the tour and I mixed their sound to make sure that it was okay.
I heard they got a great reception too. They're one of the first bands to get an encore that opened for the Who.
Yeah.
The story is that you had a test pressing and you ran into Pete Townsend in L.A.
I was working with MCA Records with my label. And Pete Townsend, the Who were on MCA. So I was walking out of the building and I bumped into Townsend, who I knew very well because we played a 10-day show together when I was in the Blues Project in New York. And that's where I met Townsend, that's where I met Clapton at that show. As a matter of fact, we shared a dressing room with Cream.
Wow.
The Blues Project. And so I had a relationship with Townsend. I also played on some Who records.
Would you consider yourself a keyboardist and a guitar player in the same breath, or would you say you're more of a keyboard player?
Well, it's hard to say. I'm working on a record, a box set now.
Oh, okay.
Which is, I don't know if we're going to be able to do it, but it's called Unreleased. And it has like a great deal of songs that I wrote, that I made demos of, that weren't necessarily going to be on my albums. And so these are just lying around, and a lot of them are very good. And I have the original demo of This Diamond Ring, which is really interesting.
Wow. So that's something that you're actively...
So that's the concept of what this box set is going to be.
I heard something to the effect that Bob Burns was having some problems, and they brought in Artemis to play on the third album, Artemis Pyle. And
well, actually, I was scoring a movie for somebody, and the producer of the movie asked me if I would produce a track for another movie that he was doing, and he told me what the scene was that they wanted the song in. And so I went to Skynyrd, and I said, I have an opportunity for you to have a song in a Burt Reynolds movie.
The Longest Yard, right?
I believe so, yeah. And they were very excited, and they had this song, Artemis's first session with them, with me.
And that song was Saturday Night Special.
Yeah.
That is one of the most badass bass riffs that I've ever heard, and that's another Ed King song. I mean, do you feel like a lot of people that Ed King was an incredible positive influence on that band, especially in the studio?
Well, he was the one I was closest to because he wasn't from Jacksonville. He was from L.A. And we got along quite well. He wasn't in the band when I heard them, when I signed them. And then, we started recording, and there he was.
Yeah, he and I guess he had played with the Strawberry Alarm Clock, and they had done something way back when. And he knew Ronnie from back in the day, and they had sort of had an open invitation to look him up if you ever got the chance.
Yeah, so that was what that was about. So they wrote Saturday Night Special, and we went in to record it, just that track, and then I had to mix it so that they could put it in The Longest Yard. And when we were recording it, there's the intro, and then it goes into the first verse. And they're very different grooves. And so there's a drum fill between the intro and the first verse. When we were rehearsing it, I said, whoa, wait a second, something's wrong here. And the drum fill was in 5/4, but none of them knew what that was. They just learned the song, and Artemis had played a fill that was 5 beats long instead of 4. And I pointed it out to them, and they said, listen, I don't give a shit what you call it. We're using it. I said, I'm not telling you not to use it. I'm just telling you it's in 5/4 time. But they didn't know what 5/4 time was.
Is that where it goes dun 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 dun? Then there's this little thing, and then they go into the first.
No, it's da 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 da, and then there's a drum fill, and then it goes ba-dum, ba-dum.
Yeah.
Ba-dum, ba-da. So it's the drum fill between da 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 dum ba and ba-dum, ba-dum. Like that.
Yeah. No, I know that song. I mean,
and I just went, whoa, wait a second, and they just said, I don't give a shit what it is. That's what we're using. And I said, no, that's fine. That was very humorous to me.
How would you compare Artemis and Bob's drumming styles? Was it a challenge to try to? I heard that Artemis had a little trouble picking up Bob's feel on some of the tunes, so they actually toured with both drummers.
I never saw them play with both drummers. I mean, I don't know about that. That was way after I was gone.
Bob was killer on the kick drum. I mean, he had some great.
He was a very good drummer.
Swamp Music, the kick drum on Swamp Music is just.
But you have to know that it was very tough to be in that band because Ronnie wrote most of the songs, and if you added drums to them, he had to buy it, and he was a very tough judge.
when you guys did the second helping record, you already had Sweet Home Alabama. That was already in the can for
That's right.
a year. The first single that you put out was, I believe, Don't Ask Me No Questions.
Yes.
Now, it's always it's almost like a poker game to try to figure out what order of singles to release. You had Call Me the Breeze and Needle in the Spoon. You had songs that might be construed to be more commercial than Don't Ask Me No Questions, but I was curious if you released...
I thought Don't Ask Me No Questions was like kind of a Rolling Stones-ish good single.
But did it do well, or did it tank when it came out?
It tanked.
Yeah. So at that point, you went straight to Sweet Home Alabama and said, let's see so let's see him ignore this, right? And then it just exploded.
I didn't want to put it out first because I didn't have anything to follow it with.
Sometimes they'll do that. They'll put out a song that is a good song, but not their A-list to see how it goes. And if it gets sacrificed...
Well, because you want to follow it with something.
You produced the first 3 records, and then there was the famous Hell Tour, which was the tour to support Nothing Fancy. And things started to the wheels started to come off. Did you feel after that 3rd record that you guys were kind of done, or how did the transition?
I knew we were done.
You knew you were done. Was it?
I didn't particularly want to produce them anymore.
Was that because they kind of screwed around too much with Nothing Fancy as far as not coming in prepared?
Well, they took me to a studio they wanted to use, and they had an engineer they wanted to use. And the guy was terrible, and I had to put up with his shit. And it was like that.
Well,
it was a very bad experience, and they only had half the songs written, so they had to write the songs in there as well. Well, it was a very bad experience. The 3rd album. It was in a studio I didn't care for. The engineer was, for instance. The first day we were in the studio, we spent the entire day just getting the drums to sound right. And then I came in the next day and they had pulled down all the mics from the drums. So like 12 hours work flushed down the toilet.
At that point, the band switched to Tom Dowd. Did you have an opinion about Gimme Back My Bullets? Did you like the sound of that record?
I didn't understand that album. And I had a relationship with that guy.
Which guy?
The producer.
Tom Dowd?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
He recorded some of my songs with other bands. So he would come to me for material before Skynyrd.
Right.
It wasn't a good album. That's all. Maybe, it wasn't as good as the other ones because the material wasn't as good and the production was different. So there you go. In my opinion, it was the worst album they ever made. But it had nothing to do with that guy producing it particularly. Who produced the next album?
The next album was a live record, and then they did Street Survivors. And I'm not sure if they self-produced that record.
No, they never self-produced.
Here's something funny. Robert Christgau, the critic, wrote this. I'll just read you a brief thing here. Lynyrd Skynyrd, Give Me Back My Bullets, MCA 1976. Ronnie Van Zant's attraction has always been the way he gets his unreconstructed say. Unfortunately, the music could use some Yankee calculation. From Al Kooper of Forest Hills, who I figured was good for 2 hooks per album, and Ed King of New Jersey, the guitarist turned born-againer, whose guitar fills carried a lot more zing than 3 doing honeycuts. So your absence was definitely noticed.
Well, I don't think it was my absence as much as the other stuff. I just didn't think it was a good album. And I was rooting for them. I remember putting the record on a turntable and saying, okay, knock me on my ass.
Right.
And then I was sitting there going, they're not knocking me on my ass.
Like I say, it is kind of muddy. There's a lot, the bass, the drum.
I only played it that one time.
Yeah, the drums didn't have the definition. I liked Ronnie's intensity on the vocals. I liked the song Searching. There's some good songs.
I don't know anything about that album. I played it once and I never heard it again.
Do you feel like the band, based on some of the comments that they've made over the years, do you feel that they didn't fully appreciate what you did for them?
I have no idea, because the next album was a very big album, maybe the biggest of their career.
I interviewed Jan Uhelski not too long ago, the great writer and editor from Cream magazine, and she wrote a story where Lester Bangs told her, I don't want to talk to Skynyrd. Here's some questions. Can you go do the interview for me? So she went to interview Ronnie, and he had a very strong impact on her. And at one point, he said he had a strong premonition that he knew he was not going to make 30. And to me, like I said, I followed the band in real time, and it seemed like they were just kind of messing around too much with the whole, we're going to live our blues man image out and destroy this and punch each other out and drink under the table.
Well, I have a copy of Ed King's book, which has never come out.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And boy, that really tells a story.
Can you give us any, since it's not out, can you give us any interesting parts about it?
No.
But do you think, from your dealings with Ronnie just alone in the studio, do you think that he was on a sort of a downward spiral and was self-destructing?
Well, the third album was very tough to do, but it was mostly because they put most of their trust in the engineer.
It is one of the more unusual, at least, pairings. If you're looking at who would produce Skynyrd, you would figure it'd be somebody like Jimmy Johnson or somebody, it's a very unusual thing for somebody not from the South, even though you were living in the South. It just didn't, but it worked. I mean...
Well, it's who heard them and knew what to do with them.
So you didn't, in other words, the drop-off in quality, right, between the third and fourth record that you were speaking of, you don't think that had anything to do with the fact that you weren't around anymore?
Well, I think that however he produced the record was probably not the way to do it. I don't know if, he was better or worse than me. He was different, though.
I want to talk about your book, Backstage Passes, and which I read in high school, a hardbound edition. It had the black cover and a shot of you. It's still out. It's being updated. It has been updated. It's still for sale on Amazon. You added a second title, Backstage Passes and Backstabbing Bastards. Who backstabbed you?
I don't know. It just was a catchy title.
It's got a nice alliteration to it. It works well. I mean, you're a great writer, man. That book is one of the best, if not the best books ever written by a musician in real time, talking about what happened. It's very well structured. It's very illuminating. I know you spent a lot of time talking about the Blues Project and stuff. And I wanted to ask you about Mike Bloomfield for a minute. You guys, would you consider yourself at the time musical collaborators and good friends, or just one or the other?
Well, we didn't really work on playing together. We just played together. And we really enjoyed spending time together. That was what got me to do Super Session.
I heard he was a really chronic insomniac.
Yes, so am I.
I hear you. I'm the same way. Would you say it's safe to say that he was a man who lived to play music and some of the other aspects of life were not as interesting to him and therefore he struggled?
No, he was a very intelligent person.
Yeah, no, he was smart, but I
That's
mean,
that's why I love spending time with him, because we could talk about anything. It was interesting for both of us.
what would you guys talk about?
Anything, literally.
Well, you made a great combination in the studio, that's for sure.
Yeah, but it was even better when we were just sitting around and not playing, just talking. I loved spending time with him. I really did. I went out of my way to spend time with him. I would just go up and visit him when I lived in L.A. and he lived in San Francisco. I would just go up there for the weekend and no business involved, just to spend a couple of days with him.
I've just often wondered just what happened to him.
Well, he was a very unusual person. There was nothing I could do about the bad things about him, so I didn't try to. I think I lived a better life than he did.
This is something I wanted to ask you, because you had a lot of friends like Jimi Hendrix and a lot of people that didn't make it, and for whatever reason their skills as musicians were one thing, but their ability to deal with life and the temptations of the road. That you seem to have an ability, an intellectual and internal stability that has allowed you to sort of sidestep some of those pitfalls.
Well, no. I know that I wrote about it in my book, but I got addicted to Percocet, which is, heroin of another kind. And it nearly killed me. And I cold turkeyed, which was the worst experience of my entire life.
What year was this about?
I don't know. But I went into a hotel room, and I did it there.
White knuckled it.
Huh?
White knuckled it?
Yeah. And I didn't have anybody there with me because I was embarrassed.
To live through that time and to actually make it was an accomplishment of itself. I mean, some of the people that...
Oh, no, it was unbelievable.
People don't understand what it's like now. Like, they don't understand in the world we live in now where everything is supposed to be safe. I was a young guy and I was watching these heroes of mine, Hendrix and Joplin and Morrison and all these people just check out. And it seemed like the entire 70s, it just progressed to people like Tommy Bolin, people like the guitar player from Free, Paul Kossoff, just dropping like flies. And then
my favorite band of all time.
Yeah. And then Skynyrd's plane crash, which was somewhat of a I'm not going to say it was a dumbass move to be flying in that plane, but it was, Aerosmith and I think Styx had passed it up. It had all sorts of, half the gauges on the plane didn't work. And, the crazy thing is if they'd gone another 200 yards, they could have landed the plane safely or safer than running into a bunch of trees. But it was literally, and then Terry Kath and all these other people, I just feel like anybody that can come out of that who wasn't like drug addled to the point like they were, vegetable or dead was a success. So I just find it amazing that the amount of work that you've done over the years to hook all these various bands up and do all these things, enable all these people to do their best work has been phenomenal. I think your legacy for that is one of the more interesting parts about you, and that you've been able to...
Well, I got the drug thing out comparatively early, and so that helped.
And you went on, of course, in the 70s to produce one of my favorite records, the Tubes debut album, and particularly White Punks on Dope, which was this amazing multi-layered production job with a very sort of cheeky LA suburban drug humor thing to it. How was it working with that band?
It was very tough. It was difficult. But I believe I prevailed. I had to throw them out of the mix.
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, you know the difference between recording and mixing?
Oh, you had to throw them out of the mixing sessions.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, the album would have been a disaster.
Oh,
it was like, make me louder, make me louder, make me louder. It was like that. And I lost the chance to produce them again.
I mean, was White Punks on Dope, was that as a labor-intensive song to put together? As
They all were.
Yeah, yeah.
They all were. That's why I signed them.
Well, you did a great job on that record. I mean, it's...
Well, it was a lot of work. It was tough. And I wasn't going to blow it in the mix. Plus, I hired the most unlikely arranger. Because I had never heard music like this. And so I went and got Dominic Frontieri, who I met at dinner one night, and asked him if he was interested in doing a band that didn't sound like anything else, and I thought that he would be great to do the arrangements. And he did it, and we became very good friends. No, but I was involved with him very early.
Who, Tom Petty?
Yeah.
Consulting, or what were you doing?
Playing.
You played on his records?
I have to think about that. When he first recorded, I can't remember the producer's name.
I think I could. Denny Cordell?
Yes, thank you. They recorded just him and Mike Campbell. That's all that there was. And Denny hired other musicians. So he hired me. And he also the same thing with Joe Cocker, which Denny did. I played on some Joe Cocker stuff early on.
Wow. I mean, I just find it amazing what kind of musical skill it takes to just come into a session, play for somebody you've maybe never even seen before or heard before, and then you just...
No, that's mostly what I did.
Yeah. Were you self-taught, I mean, as far as musical theory goes and stuff, or did you just learn it?
I studied, but I was very young. And I also went to college for 2 years, and, majoring in music. So neither of those things hurt me.
When you were touring, did you have to lug those huge Hammond organs around? I mean,
of course not.
Somebody else would, but
no, they rent them.
Oh, they rent them. Okay, yeah. Well, now they've got the Hammond. It's supposed to sound is almost as good as the original Hammond, and it's like the size of weighs like 20 pounds. And
well, then it couldn't.
I don't know if it's any good or not. Well, they claim to have sampled all the originals, original tones and.
Yeah, but still, there's nothing like a B3.
There was a funny statement that you made in 1979, I believe, that you were going to leave the country if Reagan became president. And I think you said the same thing with Trump in 2016. Did that ever happen in either case?
I don't remember about Reagan. I know I remember being in L.A. and having a police incident during Reagan. But not much else.
I had a question about the Rock Bottom Remainders. That's a band of writers including Dave Barry, Stephen King, Amy Tan, and Matt Groening. You still jam with those guys?
No, I've never seen them again since the tour.
Were any of them any good? I know Dave Barry was supposed to be pretty good.
No, they weren't.
They weren't. That's probably
and that was the point.
That's why you weren't. But I mean, it is. Was that just a publicity stunt? Get these writers together and do a tour, or?
No, it wasn't publicity. It was. Well, I mean, there was publicity involved, but they just wanted to do it, and I got that, and I thought it would be fun, and it was.
And You are currently the leader of your own band, the Recuperators. Are you guys still actively gigging or playing?
I can't play anymore.
You can't play anymore.
No, I had brain surgery and back surgery. And the back surgery put me out of business.
I had a bilateral laminectomy myself 2 years ago, and I have spinal stenosis. So, it's fortunately I'm not in. Do you have back pain, like chronic back pain?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious because sometimes you
I also have a lovely scar there.
I doubt you're going to be going sunbathing at any beach anytime soon, but the scars.
No, I never did that anyway.
With all the great acts that you jam with, the questions that I know you've been asked over and over again, and sometimes it must feel like you're a jukebox to answer these questions. But with all the acts and the bands that you played with, are there any stories that you'd like to share, or anything that you haven't told before about?
No, everything's in the book.
Everything's in the book. And it's a great book, by the way. And I did mention it is on Amazon. There was something called the Sphincter Session. And is that something you'd rather leave behind you, no pun intended? Or is
I don't know what it is.
Apparently a microphone was inserted in some guy's butt, and you recorded him tapping a drum beat on his stomach. It is.
I can't remember.
It is in the book.
Or whether we actually did it.
Yeah. Well, some of these things, it might have been something you thought you did, and then you think back on it. Did we actually do it?
No. It was definitely discussed, but I don't know whether we did it or not.
Well, I guess that there's a lot of downtime in the studio. I saw something funny, a pair of women's country boots called Freebird shoes, and they spell Freebird as one word. And I was thinking maybe somebody should talk to MCA about that. I don't know. Kind of like.
Well, I'm not gonna.
Get your Hey Jude sandals right here. Anyway, listen, Al, it's been great talking to you. I appreciate it. It's been a challenge to get this thing wrangled together, and they say good things come to those who wait. So appreciate you spending the time to talk to me today.
So what do you do? Do you play this on the air, or do you transcribe it?
I have a podcast.
Well, that answers my question.
Yeah, it's a podcast that to anyone listening out there, we had little problems with Zoom. So what you're hearing is so old school analog, it's ridiculous. We're just recording straight off of a speakerphone. It doesn't actually sound too bad. I've got a Tascam Pro recorder, which has got good quality sound. And I just want to thank you for, more than anything else, bringing Lynyrd Skynyrd to the world. And people are very, very appreciative of the job that you did, the patience that you had to have to, soldier through that and get that out.
They have no idea.
I'm sure they don't.
Believe me, they don't.
I mean, I would love to hear any crazy story you have about that, because like I said, I've read every book that
No, you haven't.
Well, I've read a lot of. I haven't read the Ed King's book. Maybe.
Well, that's the best one.
Why did that never come out?
Because he died.
Yeah, that was a shock to me. I didn't see him as, I thought he was, there's only one guy left, Gary, and he's had like 6 heart attacks of the original band. But Ed did some great interviews, some of those Guitar Geek interviews where they sit down and they ask you what riffs you done.
Well, he wasn't Southern. So he was way different than everybody else in that band.
I still find it strange. I know there's a lot of regionalism and sort of prejudice against Northerners, so to speak. And it's interesting. Would it be safe to say that Gary and Ed were not big fans of each other?
Gary and Ed.
Gary Rossington was a big fan of Bob Burns, and he and Ed were okay, I guess, but
I'll tell you a story, but you have to turn the recorder off.
Okay. Hold on.
and I know that you can say okay.
All right. My guest today has been Al Kooper. I guess it's safe to say this is a man who's given his life to rock and roll, and we're all richer for it. Al, I want to thank you for being here, taking the time to share this amazing musical road trip that's been your life. And to the listeners out there, if you want to read the full Al Kooper story with a lot of great highlights, pick up Backstage Passes and Backstabbing Bastards. It's been updated continually, and it's available on Amazon right now. Al, thank you very much for being here today.
No problem.